Ruth, thank you for joining me on the
for
Do
having
Nothing
me.
podcast. This is an absolute thrill for me. I've been learning a ton about you through your book and many other rabbit holes I've been going down. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We are in New York City, and we're at the WeWork in Tribeca. And so it's bustly around here. You might hear some noises outside the room here. We're in a gigantic, beautiful, comfortable, and very well ventilated room. Of course, I'm kidding. But thank you for coming in and doing this in this sort of environment. One of the first things I always like to ask my guests is how they get set up for the day. Mm-hmm. For me, I do nothing, which is a meditation practice right when I wake up, and then it proceeds with some exercise and some other things that I do. But I'm curious what your version of do nothing is.
Well, I definitely have a ritual every morning.
Mm-hmm.
I typically teach in the morning, so typically 8:30 or 9:30 class. I'm very adamant about eating before I teach, but I can't eat too soon to when the class starts. So I always get up 2 hours before and make my oatmeal and have my iced coffee and read the paper a little bit and check on my playlist to make sure I like it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you have your playlist kind of created beforehand.
I do.
I love this because you've been doing this forever, and you still go back to the playlist and kind of check it right before. It's like part of the routine.
Oh my God, it's how do you say it? It's just a work in motion. It might be done the night before, but then I go back the next morning and I swap out songs again. Mm-hmm. It's constantly being edited like a book. Mm-hmm.
Does that start to become second nature? I just think about, like, if I were to make a playlist, just the thought of it confuses me. Like, I can't even imagine. And doing the classes and stuff, I don't know how they come up with the flow.
It's pretty second nature 21 years later.
Yeah.
But I still actually have to put just as much time into it because I'm very picky about the songs I select, about the order of the songs, and while I might know the format like the back of my hand, it still takes time to kind of see what mood I'm in, what kind of songs I want to hear, because if they don't motivate me, they won't motivate the class.
Okay. So you grew up in the area out on Long Island.
I did.
Right? Yeah. And one of the things you talk about in your book is starting to take dance at an early age. Mm-hmm. And could you have ever imagined how dance would sort of translate into becoming, at the top of your game with the cycling studios?
Never in a million years, because I did, as I talk about it in the book, I did take to dancing very quickly and loved it. Mm-hmm. And it became a really important vehicle for me to express myself. And I had difficulty in my home expressing myself. So I think in retrospect, it's one of the reasons why I took to dance. I gave up dancing after I graduated college, and obviously it was a passion that I had been building for years and years. So in answer to your question, I never in a million years thought I would find another passion. Obviously I did, and again, never even thought if I did that it would have dance somewhat incorporated into it.
When you went to go take dance when you were young, I think you were like 8 years old, it was because of your posture, right?
Yes.
Your mom wanted you to have better posture.
Yes.
Were you upset that you had to take dance, or did you think much of it?
I was excited.
You were?
Yes, the thought of being in a ballet class was very exciting to me. From an early age, my parents took us into the city, called the city, to go to Broadway shows. And when I saw the Nutcracker at age 3, my mother claimed that she couldn't get me to leave the theater because I was so entranced by it all. So I was very excited to take ballet class. Yes.
Did you start to dream a little bit early on that maybe that might be you
Absolutely.
up on stage? Really?
Every time I saw a show or a ballet performance, I wanted to be up there for sure.
And so were you the type of young girl who was dancing in school and, you know, middle school, high school, all that? You were
Yes.
always that person?
Definitely. I was always in charge of the choreography if we did a class performance. I was the dance captain. Yes, I always was given that role.
And then once you were in high school, were you actually doing performances, like as part of the school? Or?
Yes, definitely.
You were.
And when I was in high school, I guess it was my junior and senior year, I split my day with being in high school and then going to a dance school. So, yeah, so I really was doing a lot.
Okay.
But my academic program was always really important to me too.
Mm-hmm. So as you were splitting that time, how does that work exactly?
Our school just had this special program that was an option for those people in the arts, and it was awesome. I mean, I spent the first half of my day there and the second half at school.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what was your household like growing up, you know, say when you got into some of those influential years when you were in middle school and high school?
You notice I'm taking a deep breath.
Always helpful.
So
Wait, I need to do the same thing. I'll think about it. Yeah.
I grew up with a very controlling, domineering mother, which kind of dictated the, the aura in our household. And because she was intimidating, I never really rebelled. And I think that was a problem when I got older. All my friends were, but I think I was too intimidated and too scared. I had my own little ways of rebelling that I was able to hide, but for the most part, I think it was a problem because it needed to be played out at some point in my life. So I think it happened a lot later in life.
What ways did you rebel? Like, I'm curious what it means to you.
Okay.
These under the radar.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Smoking cigarettes in the bathroom and then putting the shower on so it wouldn't smell.
Okay.
And trying marijuana when I was 13. I thought that was very, ahead of my time. And
it seems like for 13. I mean,
right?
Yeah,
I know.
It seems like it.
Able to hide it all. And then I think another example would be getting my extra hole pierced in my ear when I was 16 because my mother clearly told me that she didn't want that to happen, and I did it anyway.
You went off and did it
Yes,
anyway.
and she wasn't happy.
I was going to say, what was the scenario like when she saw it?
I remember exactly
You do?
actually
What
what it
you?
was. We were eating dinner as we typically did together as a family every night with my two older brothers and my father. And my brothers were aware of what I did, and I specifically said, don't say anything. I doubt anyone will notice. And of course, sitting at dinner that night, one of my brothers said, oh, what's that extra earring in your ear?
Gotta love
Yes.
brothers.
Thanks. And my mother, I literally specifically remember this, and my mother looked at me, and she just had this very stern look on her face, and all she said was, you defied me. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so where do things go from there? Just inside, but then as far as where you go next, actually.
Because of the way she was, my way of coping was to repress. So I repressed for a very long time throughout my life because this was how I was conditioned. And it really wasn't until I started therapy when I was 32 because my father was dying. He and I were very close, and I honestly did not know how I was going to handle that. So that's what kind of brought me in, but before I knew it, we clearly had a lot to talk about.
When you were at the dinner table, what was your father's reaction to your...
Silent.
He was silent.
He always kind of took the back seat to her.
Okay. And did you still have it? Is that the same one?
I sure do.
So you didn't go take it out.
No, good point, Rob. I think that was a really telling decision. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Was it ever discussed again?
Nope.
No. That was the end of it.
That was the end.
Interesting. And you had, as far as your dad goes, you mentioned him a moment ago, you had a special relationship
I did.
with him. I remember you saying something about, some unique times that you spent together. I don't know if you can share any of those.
Yes. I talk in the book about our trips to Chinatown from Long Island, and that was definitely our special thing, and we did it a few times a year, and it felt special because it was just the two of us. We both shared a love of food and eating. Nothing made him happier than eating good food, and my mother was never really into that, so that made it feel even more special because it was our thing, and it was a ritual for us.
How would that play out? Would he say, "Hey, we're going to go to Chinatown," or
yes,
on Saturday, and it was just the two of you?
It was
right?
just
Not
the
your
two of
brothers.
us,
Yeah.
and it was just kind of an understood thing that that's what we did. I mean, we probably couldn't have done it too often, but every once in a while.
Did you have a favorite place that you would go
in Chinatown?
to?
Yes, and it's still there.
It is? What's
It's
it
called Namwa Tea Parlor,
Uh-huh.
and it's on Doyer Street, which is that curvy, very narrow street, and as I said, it's still there, and what's interesting is it was just always this very rundown Chinese restaurant, and it actually got trendy. So yes, it did. It was kind of the place to go, which was like, how could this happen? Years? Yes, yes, in my adult years, which was very funny. But it's amazing to me that it's still there.
Do you go back?
I do, once in a while,
How
yes.
often?
Oh my God.
Not that often.
Not often. Once every couple of years, maybe.
And when you go in it, did they change it? Is that why
it's actually not that changed?
Similar.
Right. It is.
Is there a feeling that comes over you when you go in?
Definitely. I mean, it immediately brings me back. I can remember the exact booth we would always eat in, and the counting the plates after we were so full we could barely speak.
That was like a thing.
Yes,
cool.
because they stack the plates, and that's how they charge you at the end of the meal.
Okay.
And we would eat so much. There would be stacks of, 8 plates, 3 stacks, and the bill would be like $13. Yeah, it would be crazy.
I love it.
Yeah.
And growing up in New York, did you all travel much? Did you?
We traveled a little bit. We, I always remember the cross-country trip we did when I was 8 years old, which was interesting. I mean, I have a lot of memories from it, but it was a lot of fighting among the siblings and what you would expect for in a long trip for a family. They did take me to Europe when I was in grade school. We had our share of Caribbean trips. So yes, we traveled.
So you got out of the bubble, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, I always think New York is interesting. I'm not from here. I'm from Detroit, and so whenever I come, to me it's so different, and even the wiring of people is so different.
So different.
And so I'm always curious about what it's like to sort of live your entire life around it, as opposed to my Midwestern upbringing. So
you definitely get used to it, and you just have maybe a love-hate relationship with it, but much more love than hate. I think the hate comes up when it's raining and you can't get a cab or a car. That'll do it. Yes.
I'm always fascinated. I mean, to go like 2 miles in the city takes forever. I mean, at least a half an hour.
In a car.
Yeah, in a car. Yeah,
yes.
I mean, you might as well walk.
Exactly.
Really.
And I was actually thinking you were going to go somewhere else, because if you walk 2 miles, it would go really quickly, because there's just so much stimulation.
It's true. It's true. It's one of my favorite things to do here. I rarely get in a car. If it's 2 miles, I'm just going to walk.
Me too.
I'm not going to sit in a car.
I love that.
And I'm just looking at everything that's going on. I wonder if that would be good in Detroit. I wonder if that would be good in Detroit.
Exactly.
Yes. Flywheel, by the way. But anyway. So then you went off to college.
I did.
I'm going to guess your father was a physician.
Yes.
And so I'm going to guess it was an assumed thing that you would be going to college.
Of course.
In the household.
Yes.
And so tell me about your college experience. What were you like then?
It's interesting. I feel that when I left home and went to college, it was the first time I kind of didn't seem like a shy person anymore. I started to find my voice, the very beginnings of it, because again, I couldn't have a voice growing up in my home. My mother was always right. She always knew better. So it's understandable that I wasn't that comfortable with myself. So clearly leaving home gave me the opportunity to explore it a little more. And that was a good part of leaving home and going to college. At the same time, I went to an all-women's college, Mount Holyoke College. I chose it because it had a very strong academic program, but also a great dance department, and I kind of wanted both. I never would have chosen an all-women's college initially. It just happened to be one. I found it a little difficult socially. The social life with men consisted of frat parties at Amherst or Hampshire, or, there was the 5-college system there. So you did have exposure to other schools, but it was just a very different environment for me. And I really spent most of my time immersed in my studies and dancing. So I didn't really form a lot of relationships there, female or male.
Were your parents happy with your choice, or did they encourage you, or?
They were very happy because my mother went to Smith, which was next door, basically, and very similar school.
Do you think that had something to do with
my choice?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
In an effort to make her feel proud and please her, yes.
Yeah. And did you date at all in high school?
Yes,
you did?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the guys being at a college wasn't a problem for you or whatever, meaning they weren't at the college, so you were okay with that, obviously.
I had to be. Yeah. I had to be.
It wasn't part of your consideration.
No.
Having men at the.
And it's interesting, and I assume this is unusual, but yes, I had a very active social life when I was in high school, and in college I barely dated for 4 years. It's a long time.
Was that because you were so busy?
It was because I was very busy, and I also had a hard time participating in the whole kind of frat boy parties and beer drinking. It just really wasn't my thing.
You didn't like it?
No.
What kind of friends did you have at Mount Holyoke?
I had some great obviously women friends. A lot of them, however, were just from very different backgrounds than I was. A lot of private school girls from New England, and it's a very different vibe than growing up in Roslyn, predominantly Jewish. I think Mount Holyoke was 8% Jewish, and Roslyn High School was probably 95%. So it was a very different environment. I'm not saying better or worse, but just different.
Yeah. And do you keep in touch with anybody
from college? Nobody.
Interesting.
I do with high school friends.
You do?
In fact, I'm still very close with my best friend from high school.
Okay.
But college, no.
Okay. And so coming out of college, what were you thinking was going to be your thing?
I was thinking that I would move to New York City immediately, which was always my dream, and I would be a professional dancer. Obviously, moving to New York City doesn't make it very easy to just fall right into a professional arts career because it's so competitive and you have the best of everyone. So I moved there. I took dance classes daily. I took a part-time job in a chocolate shop, Toyshers, and went to auditions on a regular basis. I did a little bit of professional dance work here and there, stints with various different, very small modern dance companies, but obviously nothing that could pay my bills. And I was fortunate enough to have some support, financial support from my parents. I think they paid half my rent at that time. But, very quickly it got to the point where I wasn't comfortable with that, and I wanted to be able to support myself, and that meant giving up dancing because I didn't want to move.
Was that frustrating for you, or?
To give it up?
Yeah.
Extremely.
Really?
It was a very hard decision. I'd worked my life on that, and I just loved it so much. But what was interesting is I gave it up, and I never went back to dance class since.
Wow.
Yeah, people ask me that a lot, and I don't know why. I just, I think maybe it would have been upsetting.
Did you ever think of going to Los Angeles?
Never.
Okay.
I just was so set on being in New York, and once I started living there, I loved it. I couldn't imagine moving.
When you were finally in the city as a young woman, was that, I don't know, what was that feeling like, having maybe just dreamed about being in the city and living, what this picture was in your life?
It was amazing. It lived up to my expectations. I had a roommate, and we had this great apartment on Columbus Avenue on the Upper West Side. It was a 6th floor walk up. And the Upper West Side was obviously very different then.
Sure.
And we had a great time together. And I met a guy about a year into living in New York. So I had a relationship, and I was still taking dance classes and working in this little chocolate shop in Rockefeller Center. So I got around and had a great time.
What was it like working in the chocolate shop?
It was an experience. It was definitely a new experience for me. I loved the manager I worked with. He was so fastidious about keeping the chocolates in perfect order and in line. And the owner of the store was this older Jewish man who was very strict, and he wouldn't let us eat any chocolate. However, he would sit in the back and gobble them down. So we would always have a laugh about that. It was in Rockefeller Center, as I said, so we would get a lot of tourists, and it's a very high-end, expensive store. So they would come in, and he really didn't like catering to the tourists, because he liked a much higher class customer. So they would come in and they would say, "Do you have chocolate marshmallows?" And it would drive him crazy, and he would send them to Fanny Farmer. And we would laugh in the background.
Did he have local customers? I mean, being right in Rockefeller Center,
God.
I feel like that's the tourist hotbed.
He had a whole group of customers who had their champagne truffles delivered to them on a weekly basis, including contessas from Europe. I mean, it was crazy.
Did you ever have to deliver anything?
I never did. No, I believe actually the owner delivered them himself.
Who could blame him?
Right.
And so for you, the manager was very particular.
Yes.
Was that in alignment with sort of how I imagine you need to be in dance? There's a lot of structure and
very good correlation. It's dance. You have to be so disciplined, and you're never going to get it 100% right. You always have steps and positions to work on. So it's a difficult field.
Did working in the hospitality business like that? Did you enjoy the customers coming in, the tourists from all over the place?
I did. I enjoyed meeting people, meeting the regulars. And that's where I met my first boyfriend after college.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it worked out for me.
Okay, and that's the boyfriend you would mention before?
Yes.
And how long did that last?
It lasted about a year. He was an aspiring model, so he was very good looking. And it was just perfect for that time of my life.
What was perfect about it?
I was an aspiring dancer. He was an aspiring model. We kind of mingled with a lot of different artists and beautiful people. And it was like that.
When you're trying to make your way in this sort of very it's such a difficult business. How do you kind of keep yourself motivated and say to yourself, I'm as good as that one or this one? At such an early age, how do you not get discouraged?
It's really hard not to. And as I was saying before, in terms of when you're a dancer, you're never going to get it 100% right. You're always honing your skills, and it's a very easy kind of arena to be very insecure in. And I would go to auditions, and there would be 100 people there, and they would be looking for 5 dancers out of 100, and I sometimes would make it down to the last 10, but it didn't really matter because I didn't get the job. So very frustrating and not the best thing for your self-esteem.
So when you just sort of said, okay, I'm going to cut this off, what did you go do next?
I had no idea what was going to be next. This was my dream, my goal, and really a fish out of water. And I really kind of had to reinvent myself. I strained to think of what other interests I had. Food was one of them, cooking. I baked a lot when I was younger, and so I literally answered an ad in the newspaper for an office manager at a catering company. And I thought, oh, well, that could be interesting because it involves food, and it was located in the West Village. So I applied for it and I got it. And it was the first time I was ever at a job where I sat behind a desk. I lasted 2 years and I hated it. I was miserable.
2 years? Wow.
Yeah, so I was miserable for 2 years.
Yeah.
And during those 2 years, I met my soon-to-be future husband. And again, given the scenario, here I am in a job where I was so unhappy, had no idea what I would do next. I needed the income. I met him. He was clearly very ambitious and protective and controlling. And I thought, perfect person to help me and take care of me. And we dated for about a year and then got engaged. A lot of the reason was because I didn't know what else to do.
Were you actually thinking that at the time, or has this come to you upon reflection?
A lot of it comes upon reflection. We fell in love, and it went in that direction as it should, and hopefully would. But I do feel that what I first was attracted to in him was his ambition. And maybe in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that this would almost be an easy way out for me because I wouldn't have to think of the next job or what my career might be. And it was such a statement as to my level of self-esteem then to not even be able to take a risk and try something else.
Yeah. I just want to go backwards for one second to the catering company.
Please.
So there's something I'm curious about, and that is, how were your parents feeling about you with this wonderful college degree, being the office manager at a catering company, and the village wasn't like it is now. So it was a way different area.
I think they were just happy that I had a job
And
I was able to support myself.
Give you when are you going to leave?
No, not really. I think the only problem was I complained constantly to them, and they weren't really into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would they react when you complained?
I could tell they were getting very frustrated and kind of had enough, and they didn't really know how to advise me clearly. And
yeah. And during this whole time, you have two brothers, correct?
Two older brothers.
They're older, yeah. And were they in New York at that time as well?
No, neither one of them.
Okay.
They're twins.
Yeah.
One was in Philadelphia, and the other one, he lived in so many different cities. I'm not sure where he was exactly then, but he was in the advertising and marketing industry for cars and automobiles. So he was in Detroit at one point, in Cincinnati, in Cleveland, and now lives in LA.
Would you guys ever visit with each other? Like, would you go to Detroit or Philly or wherever they were?
Once in a while.
Yeah,
yes.
you would hang out. So
yes.
It was a decent relationship, or?
I don't know if I would say that. I tried, and I think they tried, but we were kind of set up for failure because of how my mother raised us, and being a true narcissist, the three of us kind of became people that were there to adore her. And if she had to pit us against each other in order for either of us to adore her, she would. So we didn't have a lot going for us in terms of ultimately being close.
Got it. So was there ever a time that you talked to your dad about that?
Yes, and there were also times I would try to talk to him about my mother. Wasn't really interested. He would become very quiet and say things like, well, that's the way it is.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as you started this relationship, is it Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff.
And so as you started this relationship with Jeff and you got engaged pretty quickly, did that feel like, okay, things are getting on track? Is that how you were feeling, or was there any uncertainty there, or?
After we got engaged, things kind of shifted a little bit. He did have an anger management problem, and I didn't know it until after we got engaged. And I think that's when I started to second guess whether this was the right decision. However, I didn't know what else I could do. I had no confidence in myself. Again, I was definitely looking for someone to domineer me and take care of me because that's what I knew.
Where do you think that came from? Is that because your mom was stay-at-home mom?
100%. And as I said, she was really controlling and always right, and pretty much always treated me like a little girl. And I just had no confidence because of that. I always would defer to her.
So for young women, I have a daughter who's 19, and you know, what would you say to people, to young women that are of that age as they're coming out of college and, you know?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because I have daughters as well, and they're 28, and I have been asked, how did that impact the way you brought up your daughters? So in answer to your question, as a mother of daughters, I had this model with my mother, and I just couldn't do enough to go in the complete opposite direction in how I raised them. And what I mean by that is, and in answer to your question, is I always, first and foremost, made sure I was instilling confidence in them as much as I could. Again, I was one of two parents, so you can only do what you can do, and you can't control what the other parent does. And he has always been there for them, which has been awesome. But sometimes you have different views on how to raise them, and you're different people, so the way you impact them is different. And but from my point of view, I just, again, wanted to build their confidence as much as I could. And sometimes I overindulged them because of that. But I always thought, if that's the worst thing, it's the worst thing.
So, not that there's a blueprint for this, but what are some of the things that you did to instill confidence?
One of the biggest things was what would happen if they didn't get a good grade on a paper, or they didn't get into the school they wanted to get into. Basically, what many would view as a failure, or you know, they didn't work hard enough. I always made sure that I would never come down on them for something like that. I would hope that they always had tried their best, but for various reasons, you don't do well sometimes, even if you do try your best. And I would always make sure that they still felt okay, even if they didn't get the grade they wanted.
Did you see that as they were growing up? Did you feel that they were confident, or was there any point in time where you felt like,
there were definitely moments of their feeling insecure. I think, unfortunately, that as women and girls, that's our go-to, and we have to work hard at coming out of that. I talk a lot with people about trusting your gut, because they think, ironically, women and girls have great guts, but then we doubt ourselves, so we don't always listen to our gut. And I think it's always advisable to go with your thoughts and what your body's telling you.
That's good advice. Have you shared that with your daughters?
Absolutely, yes.
And are they? Now that they're 28, I mean, they're starting to really...
they're tough, and I'm really proud of that, because I was so not that. So it makes me feel like I did a good job.
So, you know, even with some of the challenges with your marriage, what was it like, you know, for you day in and day out, and as you started to have the two girls, and what was life like for you? And Jeff was off working, and
yes, and having twins was really trying at times. It was a lot. I did have help during the day, which was awesome. I remember in the beginning, I would just be up all night feeding them, because they were never on the same schedule. And Jeff would go out off to work, and it was quite a challenge. I was ready for it, because I really was dying to have children, and it took me a while to get pregnant. So I adored being a mother, and still do, but it was hard.
You mentioned it took you a while to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And so two things. Were you laser focused on, I need to get pregnant, like I need to have a family, I need to have kids, and we got to make this happen, let's go?
When I decided that, then I became laser focused. But it's not that I thought that way in the beginning of the marriage. In fact, we waited several years before we started trying.
Was there a reason you waited? Was that intentional?
I wanted to give the relationship some time without children.
Thinking, okay,
to work on it and not have children.
And was that something that you did intuitively, or was that something that was like a thing that most people did, or that came from your family? Or
I actually think it was a need for us.
Yeah.
So, and I knew that I did, and I knew that children would just be a greater complication.
It's funny because I think some people actually think, well, if we have children, it'll bring us closer together.
Yes.
So, but how did you know that?
How did I know that?
You just knew that. It sounds like it's not that
we needed the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew that because it was there were just blatant reasons.
It's interesting that you had twins, and then your brothers are
right.
twins, so there's a gene there.
I guess so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Were you surprised when you found out you were having twins?
Well, they saw both on the sonogram 7 weeks in, and they told me, and I started hysterically crying.
You did?
I did, because more just because I was overwhelmed by this thought. And
Of two.
Yeah. I obviously called my mother right away since she had twins, and all she said to me was, just pray they're not boys. And I did pray they weren't boys, and they weren't.
Okay, so that worked.
Yes.
So thank you, Mom, for that part.
Exactly.
I always thought it would be so cool to have twins. I don't know why.
Everyone says that.
Just to watch like how they would interact together, and I don't know. Was it like that, or was
absolutely?
It cool?
It's really cool to see how they have their own language before they speak, and and the way they relate to each other.
Are they identical?
No, they're fraternal and as different as night and day.
Oh, really?
Oh my God.
Are they
so
still
different.
close?
They are actually closer now than they've ever been. They fought a lot as young sisters, and I definitely noticed as they moved into adulthood, they became closer and closer, and it just warms my heart.
As you were going through your marriage and they were now in the picture, do you think that they picked up on any of the things that were going on?
I do. I do.
You do?
And by the time they were 6, I just realized that it would be better for us to split and have them in a different kind of environment.
And when it's time for that to happen and you make that decision in your head, what does that feel like?
Oh my God, it's just overwhelming. My parents were never divorced. I never expected my life to go in that direction ever, which is probably what kept me in it for 12 years. But I believe that once I started therapy and started working on myself, the acuteness of the need to exit the marriage became more and more clear, and I certainly was able to build some of that strength in therapy.
Did you start going to therapy because you were feeling this way?
No, I started going to therapy because I needed to have help in dealing with my father passing, and literally within the first session, we were on the subject of my marriage, and I had no idea that was going to happen. I also told her in my first session that I had the perfect childhood.
Really?
Yes.
Did you mean it?
I did.
You did mean it?
Yeah. Until we started peeling away the layers.
Yeah. Wow, she was good, or is good.
Yes.
So when you walked out of there that day, do you remember that? Like, I'm picturing you walking down the street of New York or something, like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Whoa.
I do.
This is big.
What I remember the most is, obviously I talked about my struggles and my challenges, and it was just really cathartic to have that neutral person sitting across from me giving me empathy and saying, of course you would feel that way, or why would you even question your emotions on that? I hadn't really had anyone say that to me until that point, and that just really helped me.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I feel like I read it or I saw it or something at some point, and I won't get exactly how you said it right, but you said something that clicked for me, which was that you really have to be strong to go to therapy. You have to be a strong person.
Yes.
What got you thinking about that, to say that?
When you go through therapy, you uncover a lot of really tough realizations, and you have to be ready for it. And I feel that a lot of people aren't, including people who go to therapy.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because you think, oh, they're in therapy, great, they're doing the work. But there are so many there are so many patients of therapists and therapists who don't, I guess, acknowledge that the real opening up is not happening here. And again, I think it takes courage, and I think it takes strength. It's one thing to get there, but then maybe people just back down because it is too hard.
How long do you, part of my question's answered in your first session, but for other things in your life, how long does it take you to, I'll just use the term, learn the lesson? If that makes sense, while you're in therapy?
A very long time. I learned very early on in the therapeutic process that therapy is about repetition. And sometimes you have to go over things over and over again for maybe years until you finally recognize your patterns. And on top of that, realize that they need to be changed if you want X, whatever it is.
Right, yeah, that's true. Do you ever get sick of your stories? Is that a point for you?
In therapy?
Yeah.
Never.
Never say.
I will tell you, with the book, I'm doing so much talking about myself that that's it's like,
you're getting
really?
sick of yourself?
Am I going to talk about myself
well,
again?
I'm genuinely interested, and thank you for bringing it up.
That allows me to do it. So, and I am actually enjoying it a lot. It's a whole new experience.
It's a great, your life's a great story.
Thank
you.
I appreciate that.
But I was thinking about therapy because I would say to my therapist, okay, I've hit the point where I'm so sick of talking about this. Now I got to do something about it.
Right.
So that was kind of my gauge. Where
I
understand
that.
I'm so done. You must be so bored listening to this. So,
Rob, you're not supposed to be thinking about the other person.
I know,
it's about
right?
you.
Are you okay? Is my story all right?
Exactly.
How did you meet your therapist?
I was just going to point out with that going through therapy is a process in itself, and your ability to open up is a process as well. And so I have, in the course of 30 years, 28 years to be exact, I have had 3 therapists. And it's not that the first one wasn't good or the second one wasn't good. It was more about who you're ready for and how far you're ready to go. And I have found in my experience that with each one, I've been able to go further and further. And as a result, the person I'm with now, who I've been with for a couple of years, has done work with me that I've never experienced before and has been incredibly helpful. But again, I think a lot of it has to do with me and being ready for that.
Yeah. What specifically is the work that is, I'll call it like the next level for you?
I think it's really getting to the point where you can recognize why you have the patterns that you do. Not only recognize, but understand where they came from. I think part of the process is self-empathy and being able to say, wow, I had it really tough when I was a child and I didn't even know it then, and I can only imagine how much I repressed. Having those thoughts of, again, having empathy. And I think through that process, that's what gets you to the point where you actually really start to like yourself. And until you get to that point, I'm not sure you will find necessarily the relationship that is going to work for you.
When did you know it was time to leave a therapist and maybe seek out another one? And then did you have a gap in between where you sort of took a break?
I rarely had a gap of any significance. It's funny, sometimes it would be my friends who, I end up having friends who either are therapists or are very insightful. And I will say that there have been times where my friends have, kind of subtly hinted, maybe it's time to switch therapists. And my first reaction would be to get offended, like, how dare you make that judgment and decision. But the truth is, they were typically right. Interestingly, my mother was a psychotherapist, and once in a while she would say it, and that would make me furious because I couldn't hear it from her. I could only hear it from friends.
Do you stay in touch with therapists that you no longer see?
I don't.
Do you ever think about the impact this human had on your life at a period in time and how they helped you grow?
I do.
But then this human is no longer there anymore?
I do, but I think that if you ultimately end up with the next therapist who you really connect with, that person kind of takes the place.
But why do you think that people don't stay in touch?
I think it's kind of crossing a line.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
Because there's always that line of therapist versus friend. And I don't know, I feel like it would be awkward.
Did you ever see one of your therapists in public?
One of my former therapists?
Yeah.
I did. My second one, I did. And it was fine / awkward.
We had a rule, and it was that you weren't supposed to acknowledge each other.
Oh,
but
really?
I couldn't do that. I thought
that's weird.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with
So I
that.
broke the rule. I know out to there. But okay, so as you went through the divorce, my parents were divorced, and I remember very well the day they got divorced and told me and my sister what happened. I'm curious.
How old were you?
I was 8.
Wow, you were young. So my girls were 6, and that's really young. And you only understand as much as you want to when you're a child. Yeah. So really, at that age, there wasn't much discussed at all with them. I had to move out of the apartment with them, and so obviously that was a big change because I brought them to a whole new home. Yeah. And again, because they were 6, it wasn't like I could prepare them or tell them months ahead, because it was a situation where I didn't know months ahead, and a series of circumstances led to this decision being kind of sudden. Not sudden for me, but sudden in the, logistics of it. Okay. So I brought them into this new apartment and basically told them that day that we were moving into a new apartment. And I was so nervous. And I'll never forget, I put the key in the door and opened it. And this particular apartment had this very long hallway. It was this great old pre-war apartment in New York on West End Avenue. And so the door opened, very long hallway. Their bedroom was at the very end of the hallway. I gave them the master bedroom because it was big and perfect for the two of them. And I said, you guys, your bedroom is at the end of the hallway. And they went running down to see their new room. And the first thing they said was, we like this apartment better than the old one. And I literally was like, thank you. Yeah.
So it was furnished and everything. It was good.
I had it all done by the time I brought them in there. Yeah.
And so, did you consider your parenting style with your ex-husband and yourself, was it like co-parenting? Would they be?
Once we were divorced?
Yeah.
Yes. And the first couple years were tumultuous, as they typically can be in the beginning after a divorce. But ultimately, I was really proud of the way we the way we came together as co-parents, and we eventually obviously were able to and be in a better place and made, amicable co-parenting our priority. And I know the girls always really appreciated that.
And so now you had to go try to make a living again.
Yes.
And so what were some things that you were thinking about or that you went out and did?
Yes. While I was going through the divorce, very traumatic time, I belonged to a gym called the Reebok Club on the Upper West Side. Beautiful, huge full-service gym, had everything, basketball court, pool, every kind of exercise class you could imagine. And there was a spin room there, and I knew nothing about this genre of exercise. And I used to kind of walk back and forth and peer in to this room that was kind of dark, and every bike was full, and you could hear the sound of the wheels and this kind of clubby type music blaring. And I was very intrigued and intimidated at the same time. Obviously, something in me one day said, you gotta do it. Just do it. Go in there, take a class. And I did. And from the first class, I was hooked. I realized right away this didn't feel like exercise to me, which was obviously appealing because my exercise was always built into my dance classes. I never had to intentionally exercise. And the thought of working out with weights was just dreadful and boring to me. So again, this experience was just that. It was an experience. It wasn't an exercise class to me. And at the end of the 45 minutes, I not only had this incredible physical exhilaration, there was this mental, emotional catharsis that would take place. And again, being in this traumatic period of my life, it was just incredibly helpful for me. And it literally became a drug. I couldn't stop going. I was going 6 days a week. And at the end of every class, which is how I would start my day, I felt more capable, more able to confront whatever came in front of me on each day.
It's amazing that something as simple as getting on a bike and doing cycling can start to shift the way you're seeing the world.
Amazing.
And just starting the day that way.
Yes.
And there's many forms of that. It doesn't need to just be a bike, but for you, how impactful that was. Was the way they did cycling back then the way they do it now? Or?
No,
it was different.
Very different.
Were you thinking that while you were on the bike? After a while, were you starting to think, it'd be cool if you did this or did that?
After a while, yes. In the beginning, it was enough for me in the beginning. And then I thought, how could this experience be improved upon? And by then, I started teaching classes because this instructor who had kind of hooked me in from the beginning picked up one day and announced to everyone at the club that he was moving to Florida. And everyone was devastated because riders get very attached to their instructors. And I literally didn't really like any of the other instructors' classes, so I decided I'm going to have to teach. And I did just that. I auditioned, and within a few minutes they said, you're hired. And that started my instructor career as a spin instructor. And
was that your job?
Yeah.
That was a full-time job for you?
Yes. Okay. I not only taught there, I taught at Equinox sometimes, I taught at the JCC. So yeah, I was that person lugging my spin shoes and my backpack and going from place to place to teach as many classes as I could to make some money.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm always curious how a teacher, like on doing spinning or anything like that, how do you stay how do you keep your energy all day? I don't know. Like I'm tired after one class. I think I look at the person I went the other day, and I thought, she's teaching another class? I don't even understand that.
Because the thing is, Rob, it gives you energy.
Yeah, okay.
And it really sets you up for the day, and you get used to it also.
Doing numerous classes like that.
Yes.
Are you kind of taking like a little break during the class, but the people don't know?
Sometimes. Sometimes. And I feel personally that in order to kind of give a really effective class, you have to do a bit of coaching, and it's hard if you're riding full out as an instructor. It's hard to kind of coach efficiently.
So you started doing this, you got really into it, and then you started to change the way things were being done.
I did. I started to see what people, what appealed to people and what didn't, what resonated for them. And basically what I saw was there were two components that were important. One was the playlist. What kind of music am I playing? What kind of music resonates for people? What kind of music taps into a memory? From what decade am I going to play music? And I realized, obviously, it's so subjective. So it was really important to have a great variety of genres of music, years that the music was played, again, just to hopefully appeal to everyone at some point during the course of the playlist. I also noticed how much people enjoyed connecting to the instructor and the words of the instructor. And so I really made kind of this almost pseudo-therapeutic speak, if you will, an important component of the class, because that was my experience. When I got up on that bike in those first few classes and started riding, I was tapping into all kinds of feelings and emotions and mood for myself. And so as an instructor, I wanted everyone else in the class to have that experience as well.
Was that intentional, or did one day you just start talking into the microphone? And
I started to talk into the microphone pretty early on because I wanted to kind of foster that experience that I had for myself for everyone else.
But had you thought about it prior, like today I'm going to do this, or did it just came out?
Wow. Whatever comes out pretty organically, or it comes from an experience that I might have had during the course of the last week. And again, it's not that I plan to speak about it, but I might tap into it and then I share it with the group, not in a subjective way, but just in a general way. And more times than not, a rider would come up to me after class and say, wow, I felt like you were actually talking to me because I experienced that this week, whatever it was, whether it was someone who was talking behind your back or someone who didn't appreciate you in the way that you wanted them to. I mean, these are all universal experiences.
Had you done yoga classes or anything?
I had done some yoga, but never trained in it.
Okay. Well, no, the reason I actually ask is because that's a component to yoga oftentimes.
Yes.
And so when I was learning about this whole culture that, to me, you've created, I was curious if yoga was inspiring to you, or the way
I think it was somewhat, because I would actually gravitate to the yoga classes where there was a lot of that and a lot of talking, while so many people don't want it. They want it to be more physically challenging. But yes, that's what I would gravitate toward.
And did the clubs that you were doing, did they like it? Did they like that you were doing this?
Sure they did, because the lines for my classes were getting longer and longer, and I was eventually at a point where I was selling out all my classes, which obviously felt amazing.
And then was this around about the time where somebody approached you to maybe go off and do
Yes, that is the time. I was 5 years into my teaching career. I was also teaching classes out in East Hampton during the summers. So I met a really wide group of people, and actually one of the women who had first taken my class out in East Hampton approached me after the summer. It was September of 2005, and I really didn't know her, but she introduced herself and said she was taking a lot of my classes and that she wanted to open a boutique spin studio, and she knew nothing about teaching or the creative part of the business, and she was willing to fund the entire business, and would I be interested? And in seconds I said I'm in. It was just a dream of mine.
Were you making a halfway decent living being an instructor?
I was doing okay. I mean, it wasn't great, but I was able to make ends meet.
So walking away wasn't like, okay, wait, I really need to think about this. This was an opportunity that you felt like, I got to do this.
Yes, and I know that it was going to work. I really, just based on, again, the amount of people that were coming to take my class, I felt that there was a need for this. The other thing that made it very obvious to me was I noticed very early on that people who took spin classes only took spin classes. They didn't even try all of these other options at this beautiful gym. They only would come to spin class. And I thought, well, that's a great draw in itself to open a dedicated studio that just had spin. Because they were coming 6-7 days a week sometimes.
Okay, let me ask you this. The whoever was either running the fitness clubs or say the execs came in to come take a look at how things were going, and they would look at the different classes and the whole offering, and they go, wow, this spin thing is killing it. Did anyone ever approach you from the clubs and say,
Never.
Hey, we got something here, let's get this out to all the clubs? Or no?
Never.
Oh, what a miss.
I know.
Jeez.
And it was always surprising to me too.
Yeah.
They had this whole philosophy, and I don't know if all clubs do this, but at least when Reebok was there, that they didn't want anyone to be a star. They didn't want any of their instructors to have star power, maybe because they were scared that the instructors would leave or whatever reason.
Yeah.
So with that philosophy, they never really necessarily promoted the classes that were doing well.
Interesting.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So you had this partner who's going to fund the thing.
Yes.
And what happened from there? Because it's a startup. And that's
Yes.
exciting. We're in this startup environment.
Exactly. Very exciting. And from the moment we had that conversation, we started to meet and write our ideas on napkins in diners. And pretty early on, I was very aware of the fact that a very close friend of mine who took my class all the time and was also obsessed with spinning used to talk to me about wanting a spin studio. And the two of us would sit on a curb and talk about it all the time. I'm a very loyal person. I think a lot of it is because I didn't have loyalty growing up, and so it's extremely important to me. And one of the first things I thought of was I have to introduce her to Elizabeth, the person who approached me initially. And I mentioned her to Elizabeth, and she said, great, happy to meet her. And she did. And then we brought Julie in, and so it was the three of us now. And we sat down together and started planning in a much more serious way because we were set on the partnership. And and that was the beginning of SoulCycle.
And so, having never started a business before and not being the money behind it, but being the idea and sort of the main, I'll call it the main product, what, now that it's passed, what sort of things would you might maybe do differently?
I would have been better protected legally because ultimately the partnership didn't work out, and that was something I never anticipated. Again, never had any experience in business, extremely trusting. So that
is it
that was
worth
tough
it for a startup? I mean, my inclination is to trust. And think, we'll work it out. We're just humans here. Let's just figure out what makes sense and what's right. And especially in startup mode, when you are watching every penny, to go to a lawyer, and it costs $250 at a minimum if you're in Detroit, up to thousands. Is it worth that investment?
I think it's vital.
Really?
And I understand your point, and it's hard to part with that kind of money. But it sort of just sets the groundwork and, conveys a message that, we're serious here. And not only do you want to, have in writing your arrangements financially, you also need to talk about, what the roles are going to be, what the expectations are. I think it's just, we didn't do any of that. And I think it's really important to do that from the get-go to ensure a good partnership.
Yeah, I agree. It's great advice. When you guys, outside of just the cycling and sort of this component that, you bring to the table with the experience while you're there, it went well beyond the studio, at least from my own personal experiences at both SoulCycle and now Flywheel. It was very customer centric when I went in there. Where did this sort of all come from for you?
I think it just came naturally because the premise of the product was about kind of taking care of this group of people that were in your studio and giving them a shout out and giving them attention and letting them feel noticed. And that was, again, what we were selling, really. So it just sort of was spelled out from the beginning.
But even every detail from when you walk in, what the experience is like, how you're greeted in the, I don't know what you call it, the lobby, or I don't know what that
or the
part
front
of
desk.
The front
Yes.
desk. And the lockers, the locker room, or the showers, or whatever, however it's configured. The way the clothing is and how exciting it is to look at the clothing and all that. I mean, how did this all boil up for you?
I think that it was just important to pay attention to every detail because, again, you're asking people, at least in the beginning, we were asking people to leave this full service, beautiful gym and come to what was a hole in the wall. When I refer to the first SoulCycle, it literally was a room in the back of a building, street level, and it was a former dance studio. It already had mirrors up on one wall. We didn't have rubber flooring, which we really needed. We just used the floor that was there. We got our desk from IKEA. But we're charging expensive prices compared to getting a gym membership where everything seems free, even though it's obviously not. So if we are going to charge up, you've got to give them an experience they want to pay for.
Yeah, that's true. Did you guys, when you were working through the pricing model, was that easy, or
it was pretty easy? And a lot of what we decided was like throwing darts at a board, just and the truth is, at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. We're in the business to make people feel better about themselves at the end of the ride and cater to them and just make them feel taken care of.
Was there ever a point with the first venture with SoulCycle where you were able to pause and say, oh my gosh, this is crazy what's going on here?
There was. Yeah. In the very beginning, it started off a little slowly, and I really didn't know if I would end up bringing my entire following from Reebok again over to this very different kind of space. But I did, and that was just mind-blowing to me. But very hopeful in terms of where this business was going to go. And it was also completely word of mouth. So to start the business with this core group that I already had, and then, they told one friend how that works. And before we knew it, we were filling classes. And the real inflection point was when we opened our second studio in Bridgehampton, the second summer we were in business. And it's just, you get such great exposure out there. There are people, summering from all over the world, and people found us. And by the time we got back to the city in the fall, we didn't have room for everybody. So that was really a moment where we knew this is going to be huge.
Was that something you actually said to each other?
Yes, we would just look. We would look at each other in disbelief.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm in disbelief. And I know the whole story, but it's so amazing.
Yes. Thank you.
And so your role was really what while you were there?
Training instructors, finding instructors, working on the schedule, knowing which instructor would be best in which time slot, whether it was early morning or later at night. Managing instructors, which is not always easy. Because they're basically artists and have egos, and they're not the easiest personalities. So that's a job in itself, but I love it, being an instructor myself. So, it was really one of those situations where you go to work and you can't even believe you're being paid for it.
Right. And what was the culture that you were building there?
It was, again, a culture of being taken care of, and
this is the employees
and the riders. And so what I noticed was, by doing that and with the way we were teaching, there was an enormous amount of connection going on among people. And so it became this kind of family, and everybody couldn't wait to see each other every time they got to class. You knew who was going to be riding with you, and you looked forward to seeing that person. You connected with the instructor. You were treated well. It was just like people's second home almost.
And so when you began to transition out with your partnership, and you stayed on for a couple years,
I did.
I was curious about that.
Yes.
And what that felt like. Something when it was yours, and then now you were essentially an employee.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was nothing short of excruciating. And every day I walked into the studio, it was torturous. However, I would get on the bike to teach my class, and it just would all go away for those 45 minutes. And one of the reasons I stayed, there were several, but one of them was what I touched upon before, loyalty. And these felt like my riders. I brought them all here, and I didn't want to abandon them. And I couldn't imagine leaving them and leaving this experience that we would all have together.
And so then this unique scenario came up where you were able to actually go and start another studio and kind of rebrand and do something similar but different.
Correct.
What was that all about?
So one of the reasons I was so glad I stayed was because I had the opportunity to meet my future co-founders of Flywheel. That's where they found me. And they presented me with this idea of putting metrics on the bike and being accountable and knowing how hard you rode at the end of a class, and adding, big flat screens in the front of the room and having races so people could compete with each other or compete with themselves because you would see how fast you were going. I was so excited by this idea because it was such a clear way to differentiate us from SoulCycle. I had trepidation about it as well because I thought, well, if I'm going to put all the focus on these numbers, how am I going to do my emotional part of the ride? And that obviously was a component that was really important to me. So I literally got in the room one day by myself with this new bike and this new little computer screen, and just sort of winged it on my own in there to see if I could kind of do both. And it became apparent to me that I could, and then that was a relief. And that was our product. And I couldn't have been more excited about starting the business. I went in it with legal protection. I really loved my partners right off the bat. Obviously didn't know where the partnership was going to lead, especially after my last experience. But again, I was legally protected, so I wasn't in that risky place that I was in previously. Fortunately, the partnership worked out really well. The three of us really respected each other, honored each other's skills, didn't step into each other's lanes unless we asked each other to do that. So it ended up being a great partnership and a great business.
And I love the bootstrapping aspect of it again.
Yes.
And there's a great story you tell, which I'd like you to tell in the book, about your first location and freezing cold. And,
yes,
tell that story.
Building bikes. We ordered all our bikes and they don't come assembled. And so David, our partner, who is like the finance guy, always looking to save money, thought it would be a great idea if we all got together and built the bikes ourselves. And Jay and I, my other partner, looked at each other and rolled our eyes like, are you kidding me? However, we said yes. God, please, David. And we got a whole group together, and it just so happens that we had an empty space next to our space. No heating. It was a big, large, unoccupied space in New York. Freezing cold. It was in the winter. We had to wear jackets and scarves to get this done. And we got it done. Literally, we all got sick from having to do this. And then when push came to shove, they weren't assembled correctly. After all of that, you can imagine. So we had to hire people to come in and disassemble them and put them back together the right way. So thanks, David.
Yeah, I love it. David would definitely have had me that day. The idea when I was reading that, I'm thinking, and it's cold,
right?
And I'm thinking, this sounds miserable. David, why are you doing this to us?
Exactly.
I'm there with you.
Right.
So yeah,
exactly.
it was a great story, and I love that it didn't work out and you ended up having somebody hire anyway. And the space was also kind of a risky scenario, almost similar to your first space with the previous studio. So, but that caught on as well.
It did, and it's amazing to me to this day because there was nothing else there. It was like tumbleweeds, and there was one private training gym across the street, but that was it. And now the Flatiron District of New York is the fitness hub, but it's so oversaturated. So obviously David and Jay knew what they were talking about.
Great partners.
Yes.
Great partners.
Yes.
Just as I read, they just seemed like they were really wonderful
Absolutely.
people to be associated with. And you did so many of the right things along the way. And what year was that, by the way, when you opened the first?
2010.
2010.
Mm-hmm.
Can
February.
you believe that was only 8 years ago?
No.
And how much transpired over that period of time?
I can't.
Jeez.
A lot.
It's
42
amazing.
studios.
Yeah. And that's what it's today?
Today.
It's 42?
Yes.
And I was thinking about the fact that they're on cruise ships. Did I get that right?
Yes, we were on cruise ships.
Oh.
It's so funny you bring that up because I could have gone into more detail. That was one of those subjects where I thought, I missed that in the book because that was quite an experience.
Yeah.
We had some people who connected with us through our Miami studio, and that's where so many of the cruise ships are in Florida. And we started putting Flywheel Studios in the cruise ships. And I had never been on a cruise ship before, so that was a whole new experience for me. But, we trained the instructors there, and people loved it because, come on, what's the prime activity on a cruise ship? Eating. So we thought it was perfect.
Getting that, and then you can be free the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And so is that still going? Or
it's not still going, no.
Okay. The rest of them sound great. Dubai, London. I mean, it's taken you all over. This cycling thing has taken you all over the place. And I was also thinking about this, I'm just going to call it like a touch of fame in a sense when you're a teacher and the students are connecting with you.
Yes.
And so I noticed, I was watching when I went to the studios and I noticed the connection that the students have in one case recently with she was a very young teacher, I think. And she had to have been in her 20s.
I'm sure.
And they just really connected with her, and it was like she was something, like something happened there,
It's interesting, but it's so true. Instructors become big parts of people's lives.
Could you ever have imagined that? Like when,
No. And, I certainly saw it happening at SoulCycle when I was there. However, when we started Flywheel, I really put a lot of emphasis on making sure the instructors at Flywheel would really make the class about the riders. It's, because of what you just mentioned, it's easy to make it about the instructor and have the instructor become kind of like a rock star. But I was always very conscious of not letting the instructors get too much attention because you have these customers who are coming and paying up for this class, and they should really be the focus. So that was a strong component of Flywheel.
You feel that it's the right mix.
Yes, thank you.
And so I've been to both SoulCycle, and I went to both, and so I happened to have been in Chicago, and I was with my daughter. And so we went over to SoulCycle, and I thought that was a great experience. I had a really nice experience. We had a great time together. Unfortunately, I tried to get her to meet me here in New York, and that didn't work out. But I went to Flywheel yesterday, and I decided I figured out the difference.
Tell me.
The difference was I for sure was not pushing it at SoulCycle, and I was dead after yesterday's class.
I love it.
And I was like, oh, wow, okay, now I get this.
Yes.
So with this little computer thing that looks like, to me it looked like a mini iPhone or whatever, it's about that size, which I didn't expect, and it's kind of telling you your metrics. And then I chose to be up on the board. I like that you have a choice there, but I had to do that.
Courageous.
Yeah, and I was, it's men and women, and there was 5 or 6 men, I can't remember, and I was last, and it was bugging me. I was like, how am I last?
Yeah, that
That
never
can't
goes
be
over
right.
well. I know,
I'm like,
but
something can't
that's
be
what
right.
would keep people coming back, because I have to improve my score.
Yeah, so I just kept pushing, and I was working my way up, and I'm like, okay, all right, that's starting to make sense now.
You got it, Rob.
And-
That's
and,
the whole
so
thing.
Just the interaction really is cool, and it does push you.
It does.
It really does. Well, you know, and I guess if you don't want that, you don't have to use all that,
Exactly.
all the electronics and all that kind of thing. But I thought that was great, and
Thank you.
and that's the light bulb moment for you in a way when you got on the bike with this
Yes.
idea.
I mean, you know, in other studios, including SoulCycle, it was always about half a turn to the right, quarter turn to the left. No one ever knew exactly where they should be. And come on, human nature, you're always going to err on the side of too little resistance. So just by definition, your workout is not going to be as efficient.
Yeah, it's a great product. It really is.
Thank you.
And so your role. One of the things I really enjoyed that you talked about. And that I think about for myself with my business, and I see it, you know, in very leadership all over the place. As a company grows, are you suitable in a sense to be in the position that you were when it was a certain size? And I think about that for myself all the time. And you had to think about that as you guys you took on a partner, and this thing was starting to like rocket ship like
Absolutely.
It is now. So
yes, big changes came when we took on a partner in 2014, so 4 years in. And while my existence in the company in terms of my role was always about the creative end and working with instructors and kind of being responsible for everything that went on within the studio walls. That didn't change. The only change for me was I did a lot more traveling, which I really enjoyed, visiting all the other studios for quality control and making sure instructors were evolving and teaching great classes. But it definitely the company became much more corporate, which I wasn't used to. And that was tough to get used to. Tough change.
And so what did you do? How did you change your role? And was that hard?
In the beginning, it was really hard because I kind of tried to wear different hats and was certainly open to taking on kind of more executive responsibilities. But the culture, which kind of involved meetings after meetings and a lot of talking and less execution and more talking, really eventually just was not interesting to me.
And it's really, I think it's great for a leader. Actually, I think it's a great leadership quality to recognize it.
Thank you.
And to be able to say, you know what, this is needed, but it's not for me.
Yes.
I need a different role, or I should not be around.
Exactly.
And so you found the right role for you, which is creative. You're the creative, right?
Creative director.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're 100% right, because it was a gradual progression to get to that realization. And in the beginning, of course, I was hard on myself, and I thought, am I backing out because it's too challenging for me? Or, I had all these questions about it just because it was all new. But you're exactly right. The truth is, it's just really not what I wanted to do and not where I was happy.
You mentioned a favorite song of yours by Annie Lennox and Whitney Houston. Did I get it right?
Oh, is this from the book?
Yeah, I think. I don't know. I did a lot of research, so I'm not exactly sure.
Step by step?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that Annie Lennox?
It is. It is.
Okay.
Very good memory.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you remember what you talked about with that quote?
Well, that song is extremely inspiring.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just one of those songs that always resonates with people, and people really get into it, and it's one of my mainstays.
Yeah. Well, and I thought about your life and your progression.
Step by step.
It just, you're wiser now.
Yes.
And who could have thought back in when you were in your 20s and you were trying to make it as a dance and, ended up being an office manager in the village. And look at you. I mean,
never would have thought.
It's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
You just never know when things are going to happen to you in your life and how these experiences that in some ways sometimes feel like they're knocking you down, and you just don't know, like, what's my path?
Exactly.
You know?
And you never know what is going to help you as well. I mean, I mentioned in the book that at one point, I don't know, 15 or so years ago, I took a course in memoir writing purely because I always liked to write, and it was extremely intimidating. Everyone in the class seemed to be experienced writers. I didn't know what I was doing in there, but I stuck it out. And never in a million years did I think I would actually write a memoir. And I did. So it's just interesting.
Very much so.
What ends up becoming a part of your life.
What was the process like in writing this?
Much easier than I thought.
Really?
I had a collaborator who I worked with, and I was able to, the life experiences and the memories flowed really easily for me, and I really enjoyed writing about all of them. However, I was overwhelmed at how to organize, how to put it all together, time sequence, and she was an enormous help with that.
Yeah.
And she was great at kind of teasing things out of me as well, things that I needed to write about that I might have forgotten. So I really enjoyed the process. For me, the scarier part was once it was done and before it was released, realizing that I'm actually going to put this book out that really exposes some really personal things about my life, and can I do it? Can't I do it? There were definitely moments where I thought, I'm going to pull the book. I don't think I can do this. But obviously there was a stronger, more compelling force that said, yes, you're going to do it.
Why?
Because I think it was the ultimate culmination of finding my voice. I mean, there's no bigger way of doing that than being willing to talk about your personal life and your history in front of a huge group of people. So there was obviously a part of me that wanted to reach that goal.
When this arrived, what was that like?
It was surreal.
Was it in a box, or did they send you one?
It was in a box.
Okay. Was it just one, or was
no,
it
there was
a
a bunch of them.
And so was it a thing, like, where you opened it up?
Yes.
And you were like...
And I even took a picture of it and posted it on Instagram and Facebook, because it was so overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt amazing, and I felt really proud of myself, which is a good feeling.
Did you cry?
I did. Yeah. Tears came to my eyes. Oh, yeah. I am a crier.
You are a crier.
I need to cry every once in a while.
What did your girls think of, or now they're women, I shouldn't call them girls. What did they think?
I think it was a little surreal for them too, and they were and are just really proud of me. And, I think that there are things in the book that were a little difficult for them.
Yeah.
And there was some preparation work that I had to do before the book came out in terms of talking to them about certain things in the book that they might not have known. One of them at this moment has read the book. The other one has not yet. And it is. And, I made this decision from the get-go that she'll read it when she's ready. And I would never push her to. And, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But they are adults now.
Yeah. What kind of feedback are you getting?
Amazing feedback. And it's funny because I've been trying to prepare myself for negative feedback, which of course everyone gets at some point. And I think I've been spending so much time anticipating negative feedback that I'm actually shocked that I'm getting so much positive feedback, but it feels amazing. And it's fun. I like to hear what parts of the book resonate for different people. And it's kind of like almost a guilty pleasure when people want to sit down with me and say, I read your book, I want to talk about it. I love that.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's pretty surreal.
Yes.
There was something that stuck out to me a couple of times in your book when you got criticism and you were given some advice. Do you remember what they said to do when you get criticism by any chance? Criticism
in my teaching?
Like say about this or other things when you had like PR things going on.
I don't.
They said to do nothing, which I thought was good.
How could I forget
we were
that?
Meeting, and
here we are.
Things do nothing. Yes. Obviously, those words got really
big
not
for me. Act. Exactly. Do nothing.
Do nothing.
Right. And if someone asks you something and you don't want to respond, don't
Could you have ever imagined this journey taking you to kind of some fun things, like where you've met celebrities? And Sting's one of my favorite, and the Police are like my favorite, and I have an astrologist and she works with Sting, and I don't know if you know Deborah Silverman.
No.
Okay. So anyway, but I just, he's like a favorite of mine. So that was great to see. And so here he is taking your class, right?
That blew my mind in the beginning. And then, the more celebrities like that you meet, you realize they're human beings, just like we are. But he particularly he's awesome. He's just such a nice guy. And being someone who is so in love with music, and music has played such a huge part of my life from a very young age. I too was a huge fan of the Police, and that was a dream come true to have literally him sitting in the front row right there. And one of my favorite moments was when I started playing some of his daughter's music in class, and he teared up, and that was everything.
Cool
yes,
that is
and it gave me so much gratification to play her music and expose people to her music.
And then one of my other favorite stories was when you got to go to the White House Christmas party.
Yes.
And
that was amazing.
Whoa.
Yes.
Crazy. All of a sudden you're in the White House,
yes.
strolling around, you're
roaming
like a cycling instructor
I know.
At the core.
Exactly. And roaming around without any guards, and you could look at any room and any painting. And it was thrilling. It was really thrilling. And yes, that was definitely a moment of an I made it moment. Again, never in a million years could imagine that happening.
Now, when you meet a sitting president, what is the energy that's going on in that moment? Because obviously for him, they're masterful at making you feel like you're the only one.
For sure.
But they've met 300 people at the party, or however many. But it feels like there's a moment, right?
Oh my God, totally.
So what was it like?
It's, you just feel, as you were saying, you feel so special because they're looking you right in the eye, and they're so focused on you in that moment. And it's like you're meeting the leader of the country. It's just, it's surreal also, and
do you think
thrilling.
It was Obama, right? Do you think he knew what your background was?
No.
Okay.
No.
What if he said something like, Flywheel is awesome. I just had a private instructor come in with a couple bikes.
I wish, but no, he had not been to a Flywheel class. I do too. He's in great shape. So yeah.
So cool. I think I was thinking back to your mom for a second. One of the things is, as I was reflecting on all this, is this experience that you had with her, which I wondered if you'd ever thought of it in a different kind of way, where she really set you up for all this in a way. This tough thing, and wherever it came from for her, but here you are, and it's like remarkable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, and I feel that I'm getting there, and it's so true. And obviously being a parent myself, and you being a parent, that at the end of the day, we do the best we can. Certainly no roadmap for parenting, and I can now recognize that she did the best she could with her limits and what she was capable of. And we had very positive moments together as well. And although I struggled a lot because of some of the things that were instilled in me, yes, I feel like I am finally getting to that point where I realize if she hadn't been my mother, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Yeah. This journey that we're on, and we get faced with these, adversities. Of course, the worst is when it has to do with one of your parents.
Yes.
But we're here, and we're learning how to deal with stuff, and then we go and we get past it, kind of, and get better, and then and so on and so forth, and it's like we were made for it.
Yes.
It's like you were made for all this.
So true.
Really, and here you are. I just kept thinking about where you're at in your life right now and how amazing it is. And,
thank you.
And are you having fun?
I am.
Are you? Okay.
I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm having a lot of fun with the book. Obviously, new territory for me, and meeting great people, and kind of feels like I'm doing what I do on the bike, but in the book. And I get to reach an even broader audience, and that feels really great for me.
You'll be inspiring people with this book, for
I hope
certain.
so.
For certain. And I my daughter, I'm going to give her a copy. I'm hoping you'll sign it for her.
Of course. But that was really my goal, Rob. It was to inspire and to let people know that with all the challenges we all go through, we're never really alone. That was really the message I wanted to convey.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Did I miss anything?
Whew. I don't think so.
Okay.
You're good.
I will say this. I was struggling yesterday mightily because as I kept doing more and more research, in finishing up the book, I'm reading and I'm watching things on the internet with the Sony shoot with like a bazillion people around you.
Exactly.
Porsche, was that one?
Porsche, yeah.
Pantene.
Yes.
The hair. and the PBS special.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about the WeWork space, and I'm thinking, what is Ruth gonna do when she walks into this space?
Okay, first
and
of all,
I was just like beside myself.
Okay, that's crazy because I don't judge. And secondly, as I said, it pointed out in my book, the first few years of Flywheel, my partner and I worked in an electrical closet.
Yeah.
So.
That's what got me past it. I knew you could appreciate it all.
Absolutely. And it's so unimportant in the end.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop you from doing a great job at what you do. So.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know how busy
pleasure.
you are, and I
Thank
know
you.
how much you're talking about the book, and very much appreciate that you were willing to come over here to the WeWork space. And I did have to get a T-shirt yesterday.
I love you.
It says,
that's awesome.
It says never
coast.
Never coast.
That's what it's all about.
A great message.
I do
really,
too.
actually.
I love Never Coast.
Exciting. So, thank you again for doing
You're
this.
welcome.
Really
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it too.
Can I give you a hug?
Yeah. How'd it go?
Thank you. Well, you can tell me.
I thought it was good.
You're
You made
fantastic.
it very easy.
Okay.
You really did.